China is no longer seeking just to be part of the international order. Now China wants to shape that order. Under Xi JinPing, the emphasis is on the country's growing wealth and power, on China's gathering strength. With Russia threatening to invade Ukraine, Beijing and Moscow are increasingly aligned. Despite a diplomatic boycott led by the United States and a global pandemic to contend with, the message at the start of the 2022 Winter Olympics is that these games and future business will be conducted on China's terms. Hosting the Olympics can be a valuable opportunity to send a message to the rest of the world. The plan for the Beijing Winter Olympics was to show off the country's achievements under the Communist Party's leadership and to remind Chinese citizens how well they're doing under one-party rule. But while these games are certainly going to showcase Chinese power, they are not going to be anything like what the leadership had originally planned. For a start, there's the global pandemic and the severe restrictions the Chinese government has put in place. The games themselves are going to take place inside a closed-loop bubble that's meant to keep athletes and support staff separate from the wider population. Athletes will have to be fully vaccinated, tested daily, and stay within their designated zone. There will be no public tickets on sale, and Beijing residents have been warned to stay away from the facilities, and that even if there was a traffic accident involving an official vehicle, they shouldn't try to help. Then there's the diplomatic boycott. The United States, UK, Australia and Canada are among the countries who won't send official delegations to protest China's human rights abuses.
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games. U.S. diplomatic or official representation would treat these games as business as usual in the face of the PRC's egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang, and we simply can't do that.
IOC fails human rights. IOC fails human rights.
As we stand at the start of these games, at least 1 million Uyghurs and people from other ethnic minorities are thought to be locked up in internment camps in China's Xinjiang region, where the United States and others say the Chinese authorities are carrying out genocide and crimes against humanity. There are reports of sexual assault, forced sterilization, and torture. Hong Kong's civil society has been utterly gutted after Beijing imposed a new national security law there in 2020, and Xi Jinping has presided over a concerted crackdown on human rights and individual freedoms across China. But while the Chinese leadership would undoubtedly prefer to have all the global leaders in the audience, the effectiveness of the boycott has been undermined by the pandemic restrictions and has enabled the government there to play it down. The one leader who is there front and centre is the Russian President Vladimir Putin. With Russian forces massing on the border of Ukraine, Putin has travelled to Beijing for talks with Xi. According to Putin's spokesman, they planned to synchronise their watches and discuss what Chinese officials have called Russia's legitimate security concerns. While the Chinese Foreign Ministry has strongly denied that Xi has asked Putin to hold off on an offensive until after the Games, officials will be all too well aware that Russia invaded Georgia during the opening ceremony of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Putin and Xi have stressed the strength of their personal relationship, but they're also increasingly aligned in their opposition to the United States and their shared vision for a world order that is no longer dominated by the West. Russia has become much more dependent on trade with China since 2014, after the sanctions that followed its annexation of Crimea, and Beijing could play a critical role as a counterweight to any attempt to isolate Putin following any new assault. Putin's visit to Beijing for the Olympics gives both leaders the opportunity to present an image of unity and to show that they are not going to be persuaded to oppose one another.
So much of China's history can be found in Beijing's Tiananmen Square.
The 2008 Beijing Olympics were billed as China's coming out party to the world. but these games are going to feel very different. Back then, there was much more of a sense of optimism about where China was heading and the role it would play in the world. The priority for the Chinese government seemed to be on the spectacle and delivering a magnificent event that would show how China was reclaiming its rightful place on the world stage as a great and respected power.
Now each of the people who are running with the flame are being surrounded by police and Olympic organisers.
There were still serious concerns then about the country's approach to human rights. Mia Farrow called the Games the Genocide Olympics and called for a boycott of the opening ceremony. And the torch relay was repeatedly disrupted by protests against China's crackdown in Tibet. But those who wanted the Games to go ahead insisted that engaging with China and staging the Games there would advance human rights and be a catalyst for change. 2008 was also the year of the global financial crisis, and China came out of both events with a renewed sense of swagger and confidence. Thanks to a massive government stimulus package, the Chinese economy bounced back faster than the United States, and officials there point to their handling of the crisis as evidence of the superiority of China's political system under the Communist Party's rule. In 2008, Xi JinPing had just been promoted to the Politburo Standing Committee, the party's most senior decision-making body. He was put in charge of final preparations for the Olympics, and the success of the Games reflected well on him. But since becoming leader in 2012, he has confounded some of the rosier predictions about where he might take China, abolishing term limits on the presidency and consolidating power in his own hands. At the Communist Party's 20th Congress this autumn, he's expected to secure a third term in power and cement his status as the country's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong. The world beyond China's borders has changed too. The rivalry between China and the United States is intensifying, and there are warnings we are entering a new Cold War. It all feels very different from the optimism and enthusiasm around the Beijing Summer Games in 2008. These days, China's no longer looking for approval from the international community. Beijing's ambassador to Washington said recently that the idea the outside world could change China was always an illusion. At the start of these Olympics, China is demanding respect on its own terms and setting out its rules of engagement for the years to come.